All right. So as I alluded to last week, we're hitting a transition point in our study. Week 1, this was the class schedule that I gave to you. Told you we were going to spend about 4 weeks, 4 to 5 weeks, setting the stage, really getting into the background and the context of the book. We were going to talk about the key characters and the key players in the story, set up the time frame and a lot of other things. If you think back, you'll remember our 4 keys, which we've talked about every single week. What are our 4 keys as a reviewer? Throw them out there. Time frame. Audience. I heard style. There's background. Background. Time frame, audience, background, and style are our 4 keys. We've used those a lot. We've seen those a lot. They've really helped us put the big picture of these images into place. And those are important keys. We're going to continue talking about them. We're going to continue using those things. In addition to the keys, we dug more into the audience in chapters 2 and 3 of Revelation. We learned about the audience. We learned about how Jesus knew his people. And in chapter 4, we saw that God was on his throne in heaven being worshipped. And he was with the saints in Asia Minor, along with Jesus. God and Jesus were the 2 allies fighting with the saints of Asia Minor. And we had 4 enemies that we talked about. I'll take a moment to let you know. My wife let me know I made a mistake in your lesson book. If you did the pre-class material for this evening, you'll notice I had the completely wrong number of blanks on the allies and enemies. My wife thought I was trying to trick everybody up, but we actually did talk about 2 allies and 4 enemies, not the 3 and 2 that I have in the book. So sorry about that if that confused you. You probably were not wrong if you thought that looked weird. We have our 4 enemies. We have the dragon, who was Satan. We have the sea beast, representing the political power of Rome. We have the earth beast, representing the cult of emperor worship, supporting the emperor. And then we had the woman, the Babylon, the mother of harlots, representing the immorality of Rome. And all of these, the allies and enemies we talked about, along with the keys, we all made sure we knew that this is all about Rome. We're talking about Rome. The entire book of Revelation is about this one specific set of circumstances around these group of Christians in Asia Minor. And that's really the stage we've set thus far. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to transition into the story. We're going to go back to chapter 6, which we've skipped over, and we're really going to start laying out the events of the book. Progression will start taking place. Events will lead to more events. And ultimately, we'll see how this matter with Rome plays out and what the outcome will be. There's a structure to the rest of the book that we're going to see. And it's these groups of 7. We're going to see 3 different groups of 7. That's really going to lay out the entire story for us. We're going to see 7 seals that we're going to look at tonight. We'll see 7 trumpets. And then we'll see 7 bowls of wrath. Now this really is the outline for the rest of our study, is these groups of 7. Within each of these groups of 7, there is also a sub-outline. Each of these groups will be laid out in a very specific way, and you'll see this in all 3 groups. The way this is going to work, and you'll see it every week, is first, we'll see the first 4 items. So, for example, the first 4 seals will be very similar to each other. They will be parallel to one another. The seals will be directly related to, the first 4 will be directly related to one another. And then after that, we'll see the 5th and the 6th of the group. The 5th and the 6th will be different than the first 4 every single time. They'll be related. They're going to be as a result of the first 4, but they will look different. And then after the sixth comes an interlude. Each time, as we see a group of 7, after the first 6 are presented, John will take a break from what he's writing. He'll go into what I'm calling the interlude, where he'll take a moment to discuss an important matter or a pressing matter that's often related to the first 6 of the group. And then we'll see the 7th. Now the 7th is important for each of these groups because the 7th of each group is a transition to the next. Okay, so if that was unclear, let me try to make it a little clearer. Tonight we're going to look at the seals. Okay, we're going to look at each one individually, and you can expect that the first 4 will be very similar. 5 and 6 will differ, and then we're going to stop. We're not going to see seal number 7 until next week. We're going to see an interlude. John's going to answer a very important question tonight in the interlude before he moves on. And then the 7th will transition to the next. The 7 is the next group. The 7th seal is the 7 trumpets. The 7th trumpet is the 7 bowls. That's the progression that we're going to see. And that'll be a little bit more clear as we put the seals in their place tonight. So this map I've got laid out for you will probably make a little more sense at the end of tonight's study. So we're going to start this evening in chapter 6, looking at the seals. So let's do a little bit more of a refresher here. We're coming out of chapter 5. What was happening at the end of chapter 5? We had the lamb. And the lamb had what? He had a book or a scroll. Okay, and what was that book or scroll? I already told you tonight. It's the rest of the story. Okay? What was everyone doing at the end of chapter 5? What was the mood? Worship. Okay, that was all through chapter 4 and chapter 5. What was everybody waiting for? The scroll to be opened. If you remember chapter 5, it was a dramatic scene. Everyone was anxiously waiting. Who is going to be able to open the scroll? People are weeping. People are sad because no one is able to open the scroll. People are desperately waiting for this to happen. And the Lamb is able to open it. So as we move to chapter 6, it's being opened. This is what everyone has been waiting for. This is what everything has been building up to. This is the big moment when stuff is about to happen. Everything they've been waiting for. Seal number 1, beginning of chapter 6. Then I saw when the Lamb broke one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying, as with a loud voice of thunder, "Come." I looked, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out to conquering and to conquer. We're going to go through each of these seals piece by piece, okay? So for seal number 1, describe the action. What happens when the first seal is broken? It's rather simple. A voice like thunder and a white horse. Don't be scared to speak out. It's an easy question right there. A white horse comes across the stage with a rider on it, following this loud voice of thunder. This rider has a bow in his hand. He has a victor's crown on his head, and he went out to conquer. Now, there's not many details here about what we're looking at, but we're left with the question of what does this symbolize? What does this mean? Now, it's not immediately obvious for this rider what this symbolizes, since we don't have much information right here in this context. But we do have a few things. One, we see that this rider has a victor's crown, which tells us immediately that this rider is on the winning side. If you remember, we talked about this is a battle. There's going to be a winning side and a losing side. The line has been drawn. This rider is on the winning side. And this rider goes out to conquer all of the earth. Now, that may not be much to go on, but I'll go ahead and tell you, this rider symbolizes Jesus. And this rider symbolizes him bringing salvation and him bringing the gospel to the world. Okay, but I'll clarify. Let me qualify that and tell you how I know that. We will see this rider again later in the book. That's why I said it's not immediately recognizable who this is if you're not familiar with the rest of the book. We'll see this rider again in Revelation chapter 19 with a little bit more information. In Revelation 19:11, it says, "And I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it is called Faithful and True. And in righteousness he judges and wages war. His eyes are a flame of fire, and on his head are many diadems. And he has a name written on him which no one knows except himself. He is clothed with a robe dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God." Does that give you any more clues to let you know who it is relative to what we have in chapter 6? I already told you it's Jesus. We've got symbols being used here from chapter 1. The eyes like a flame of fire. That's how Jesus was described in chapter 1. His name is the Word of God. That's something we're familiar with being used as a reference to Jesus. He has diadems. He's a judge. He is righteous. He is faithful and true. All of this is telling us that this is Jesus. This is Jesus leading his charge to conquer. And in what way does Jesus conquer the earth? Was it over death? What came when he overcame death? What was brought about? Salvation. Jesus brought about salvation through his death. If we look at these things, he has a bow. He's going out to capture the hearts of men. Jesus did this through salvation. That's how Jesus brought us to him. This first seal merely represents the coming of the gospel through Jesus. So everything that follows is a direct result of this image. Everything that follows is a direct result of the gospel coming into the world. Seal number 2. When he broke the second seal, I heard the second living creature saying, "Come." And another, a red horse, went out, and to him who sat on it, it was granted to take peace from the earth, and that men would slay one another, and a great sword was given to him. Again, describe what happens when this seal is broken. Okay, war, peace was taken. By what? What's similar in this seal to what we had in the first seal? A horse, okay? We have a horse and a rider, the same way we had in the first seal. Here's a little hint. That's going to be what we see in seal 3 and 4 as well. Okay, so when I ask that question later, you know what the answer is. We have a red horse with a rider who has a sword in his hand. And his mission is to take peace from the earth. War breaks out as a result of this rider coming. So the question, what does this symbolize? Remember, I said that what came out of seal number 2 would directly follow what came after seal number 1. So in what way might peace be taken, how might peace be taken from the world as a result of the gospel? Say it louder. Persecution of the Christians. Okay, did somebody else have something to add? Persecution would follow as a result of the gospel. When the gospel came into the world, it wasn't immediate peace everywhere. It wasn't the bringer of peace to all. There was conflict that resulted from the gospel. There were some bad things that came on earth because of the gospel. And if you think that's unfair for me to say that, think about what Jesus said when he was on earth. Jesus said, "Do not think that I came to bring peace on the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I came to set man against his father, and daughter against his mother, and daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's enemies will be the members of his own household." Jesus said when he was here, "The things that I'm bringing to you are not going to make peace with everyone." Jesus even said, "Don't be surprised if the world hates you. Just know that they hate you because they first hated me." Now, I'm not saying at all, don't hear me say that the gospel was a bad thing, because we know it wasn't. But the point of seal number 2 is to make sure that these people know some of this bad stuff is coming because the gospel does not make peace with everyone. Some people will resist the gospel. Some people will hate the gospel. And because of that, there will be conflict. It's not the gospel's fault, necessarily. It's not a fault in the gospel. It's a fault in the people who are hearing it. There will not always be peace on earth, which these people at this time would be very, very familiar with. We've repeated it every week. They're going through persecution. They're experiencing very bad things because they're following the gospel, because they're following Jesus, who is leading the conqueror. Seal number 1. And seal number 2 is just letting them know the context of what they're going through. Seal number 3. When he broke the third seal, I heard the third living creature saying, "Come." I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard something like a voice in the center of the 4 living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. And do not damage the oil and the wine. Describe the action of seal number 3. Do what? Okay, this is all around buying and selling. What did I tell you to answer when I asked for seal number 3? There's a horse and a rider. Okay? Now we have a black horse, and its rider has a pair of scales, which is now alluding to the buying and the selling in the marketplace. And there's this phrase about a quart of wheat for a denarius, which we'll make sense of in just a second. What are these scales that are being talked about? Does anybody know what a scale is in this context? It measures, okay, and you kind of alluded to it, talking about the buying and the selling. Scales would be in a marketplace. When I would go to purchase something, the vendor who was selling to me would use the scales to weigh out gold and gems and whatever it was I was using to pay. And he would weigh that against the things I was trying to buy. Yes? It was. Yes, so these scales were to be just. They were really the measure against which the currency could be measured in the marketplace, and how much you were able to buy for what you had to offer, which leads to this phrase about the quart of wheat for a denarius. Just a little background on the items in this phrase here. A denarius was a coin roughly equal to the amount of money that one person could make in one day. So if I worked all day long, I would make 1 denarius. A quart of wheat was about what it would take to sustain one person for 1 day. So in 1 day, I need to eat about a quart of wheat to maintain my health, to stay alive. So if we put those things together, I have to work all day long to buy what it takes for me to live for 1 day. And tomorrow, starting over. Now imagine if you were a man with a wife and with kids. Put that equation into its context. I work hard all day long, and now I can only buy enough food for 1 person. I have a family of 4 to feed. Who gets to eat that day? it becomes difficult. We're looking here at economic hardship. This black horse and its rider symbolize the hardships being suffered by the Christians in this conflict with Rome. Again, remember the historical context. Those who would not worship the emperor were deprived many of the credentials they need to do business that they needed to do. They sometimes couldn't do business at all in the marketplace, but if they were allowed to, maybe the scales wouldn't be fair. Maybe their wages just simply weren't able to sustain them. They were going through economic hardships at this time. Remember, this is what the mark of the beast was really talking about. Those who were traitors to the empire didn't have the mark. They could not come in and do business the way everyone else could. Some of those people couldn't buy food. Some of those people couldn't get jobs. There were difficult times coming on them economically and as far as their material wealth went. It was suffering at this time. But it's important to keep in mind that there was not a shortage of nice things at this time. That's not something to get confused. It wasn't that people didn't have access to the things they need because there wasn't nice things around or because there weren't riches around. We know they were. The phrase at the end really makes this clear. It says, "Do not damage the oil and the wine." So though these other things are having shortages for them, there's a plenty of oil and wine and other things out there. People just may not have had access to it. It's not that the riches of the world were gone. Not everybody could get them. So again, think about the flow and the progression here. The gospel comes. As a result, people are going through persecution and difficulty. Peace is being taken away, and now they're going through economic hardships. It's not just affecting their soul or their relationships or life around them. Economically, and the resources, the material things they have are now being affected because of this. Seal number 4. When the Lamb broke the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature, saying, "Come." I looked, and behold, an ashen horse, and he who sat on it had the name Death, and Hades was following with him. Authority was given to them over a fourth of the earth to kill with the sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by the wild beasts of the earth. Describe the action. There's another horse and a rider. It's a sickly horse. This is an ashen horse. Who's the rider? Death, followed by Hades. Death is riding on this horse, and he is given the authority to kill. Figuring out what this symbolizes, I don't think, is difficult. Anybody want to take a stab at it? Death. Death in this image symbolizes death. This is an easy one. Following the progression of everything we've seen so far, people are going through hardships. They're being persecuted. They're going through the resources being taken away and diminished, and now some people are even going to face death. Death is allowed to conquer some of these people. It's important to note that this is only given authority over 1/4 of the earth, meaning it's not an entire, it's not given authority over everything. It's only partial authority is given to death at this time. Not everyone is going to die as a result of these things. Only some people will. But some people will face death. It's coming. It's inevitable. We've had the first 4 seals with these first 4 riders. As I told you earlier, things are going to change, okay? The 5th is not going to be the same. Let's go ahead and read seal number 5. Again, I said things are going to change, but let me clarify, it's still related, okay? We're not completely changing subjects. Verse 9. When the Lamb broke the 5th seal, I saw underneath the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God, and because of the testimony which they had maintained. And they cried out with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on the earth? And there was given to each of them a white robe, and they were told that they should rest for a little while longer, until the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who were to be killed, even as they had been, would be completed also. Again, I said things change a little bit. Describe what we see now on seal 5. Martyrs. Okay, again, no horse. We see souls under the altar. These are the martyred disciples, verse 9 tells us. Those who had died because of the testimony they had, because of the perseverance that they stood strong to. And these martyrs are asking a question. They're asking God, they're pleading with God, how long are you going to let this go on? How long until you do something about this? And they're told they must be patient. Not yet. Hold on a little bit longer. As I talk about what this symbolizes and what this means, again, as I've said the past couple weeks, let's avoid getting too literal. Okay? If we think about the martyrs, Christians who have died and are now waiting eternity, who have salvation, I don't think that these Christians are literally, after their death, angry with God. God, how long are you going to wait to fix this problem? Okay? I don't think we are literally seeing people angry with God, crying out to God. These people have already left earth. They've already left the problem. I think this merely symbolizes the thought behind the question that's being asked here. Everyone's got to be thinking it. Everyone's got to be wondering, how long is God going to let this go on? I mean, people are being killed for God. People are dying for God, for standing up for Him, for staying faithful to Him. How long is God going to let this go on? That's the question. Everyone's asking it. The saints in Asia Minor are most likely wondering the very same thing. So the question's being introduced to them. Look, we recognize. God is saying, look, I recognize that you're wondering, that you want to know, but I'm telling you, be patient. Wait. There is purpose to the delay. And he gives some hint here as to what that is. He's waiting for the number of the saints to be numbered, those who would be with them and those who would also die. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the class tonight. But it is important to note, before we move on, God is going to deal with it. God makes that clear. He doesn't say, tough, deal with it. He says, not yet. God is going to come. God is going to put an end to the suffering and the persecution that they're going through. It's just not coming yet. But there is hope for that to come in the future. Seal number 6. In verse 12. I looked when he broke the 6th seal, and there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth made of hair, and the whole moon became like blood. And the stars of the sky fell to the earth, as a fig tree casts its unripe figs when shaken by a great wind. The sky was split apart like a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain, island, and island were moved out of their places. Then the kings of earth and the great men and the commanders and the rich and the strong and every slave and free man hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they said to the mountains and to the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand? Describe the action of the 6th seal. What do we see? Judgment. Okay, not judgment day necessarily, but we'll get there. What else? What's happening? What else is going on? Earthquakes. Okay, what else? Destruction. Yeah, that kind of sums it all up. Destruction. how are people responding to this destruction they're faced with? Yeah, they're hiding. They're pleading to the mountains, please fall on top of us, hide us, do anything you can, shield us from who? God and the Lamb. These are people on earth begging and pleading to be hidden from God. They don't want God to find them because of the judgment that is coming on them. Didn't keep up with the PowerPoint here. Everyone is standing in fear of God on his throne. Everyone is awaiting the effect of this destruction. So the question is, what does this symbolize? Well, it clearly depicts judgment, as we've said. It's judgment of God on man. But many people conclude that this is talking about judgment at the end of time, that this is the final judgment of man before we all go to heaven. However, we need to maintain the flow of thought within this chapter. The question has been raised, how long is God going to judge, or how long before God will judge the enemies of his people? And the answer is that they must wait for God's appointed time. However, delayed judgment doesn't mean that there won't be judgment. Okay? With the breaking of the seal, we see that God is going to do in his time what he believes is best. He will judge the enemies of his people and judge them for his wicked deeds. This is not a picture of final judgment at the end of time. It's a symbol of the judgment that God would bring against the enemies of his people within this context. Okay? All of the chapters leading up to this, everything we've talked about is alluding to the fact that we're talking about Rome. Everything's talking about Rome. Everything that's going to happen in this book is taking place soon. This is all going to happen within a time frame. This is where our keys become very important. Our keys prevent us from pushing this out to the end of time. They tell us we must keep it within the time frame. We're talking about the judgment of Rome, or more so the Roman Empire and the things that were going on around these Christians at this time. This message was for them, for what they were going through. That's really important. And when God brings judgment on the Roman Empire and all that surrounds it at this time, everyone's in fear. Everyone's hiding from God. And so the question is asked, if all of this bad stuff is coming down and this destruction seems so terrible, who's going to be able to stand against this? Who's going to be able to live through this? Who will stand? That's the question. Now, I told you, after the sixth seal, we're going to go into an interlude. John is going to answer this question. The visions that were given to John will answer this question. Who shall stand? The impending judgment that is about to come on this circumstance and this situation. In order to answer that question, let's keep reading. In chapter 7, we have the interlude. Who shall stand? Chapter 7, verse 1. After this, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth, so that no wind would blow on the earth, or on the sea, or on any tree. And I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun, having the seal of the living God. And he cried out with a loud voice to the 4 angels, to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, Do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the bondservants of our God on their foreheads. And I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000, sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. From the tribe of Judah, 12,000 were sealed. From the tribe of Reuben, 12,000 were sealed. From the tribe of Gad, 12,000. From the tribe of Asher, 12,000. From the tribe of Naphtali, 12,000. From the tribe Manasseh, 12,000. From the tribe of Simeon, 12,000. From the tribe of Levi, 12,000. From the tribe of Issachar, 12,000. From the tribe of Zebulun, 12,000. From the tribe of Joseph, 12,000. And from the tribe of Benjamin, 12,000 were sealed. After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could count, from every nation and all tribes and peoples and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, and palm branches were in their hands. And they cry out with a loud voice, saying, Salvation to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb. And all the angels were standing around the throne and around the elders and the four living creatures, and they fell on their faces before the throne and worshipped God, saying, Amen. Blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen. Then one of the elders answered, saying to me, These who are clothed in white robes, who are they, and where have they come from? I said to him, My Lord, you know. And he said to me, These are the ones who have come out of great tribulation, and they have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. For this reason they are before the throne of God, and they serve him day and night, and in his temple, and he who sits on the throne will spread his tabernacle over them. They will hunger no longer, they will thirst no more, nor will the sun beat down on them, nor any heat. For the Lamb in the center of the throne will be their shepherd, and will guide them to the springs of the water of life, and God will wipe every tear from their eyes. So again, we're answering this question, who shall stand? And we have this long interlude here answering the question. I have this broken down into really four different scenes, different groups of verses here, to help make a little more sense to us. First, the first four verses describe what happens right here at the very beginning with this angel, multiple angels. What's happening right here early on? Judgment and wrath are coming. Okay, we have these four angels who are given the power to affect and harm earth and the sea. That judgment that we just talked about is coming. But that angel says, or the angel comes who has the seal of God's people, says, before you do this, before we harm anything, we need to seal the people of the living God. Okay, I alluded to this last week. We talked about the mark of the beast, that the people who followed the beast, who followed Rome, had a figurative mark. And that on the flip side of that, God's people also had a mark. And that's what this is talking about. These people were being marked or sealed to show that they were followers of God. The earth was not allowed to be harmed until God's people were marked. And we'll show what this mark means in a little while. But we see that 144,000 people received this mark. And in the second section, in 5 through 8, we see who these 144,000 people are. We see 1,200 from each of the 12, what? Tribes of Israel. Okay. We have each of the 12 tribes of Israel. Each of them have 12,000 people within them. So we need to focus for a second on the 144,000. It's probably a number you've heard from other people, specifically Jehovah's Witness. If you talk to a Jehovah's Witness teach from this chapter that 144,000 people will be in heaven. No more, no less. Once we hit 144,000 people in heaven, it's cut off. We're done. This chapter teaches us that no more than 144,000 people can be saved. Okay, that's not true. It's not what it means. But that's what people teach from this. This is where that teaching comes from. But we have to ask the question, I think we all understand, 144,000 people being the only ones who can be saved is not a biblical teaching. We know from other places in the Bible, God made it very clear He desires all men to be saved. God wants everyone to be saved, so why would God put a cap on salvation and say no more than this number of people can be saved? And if He did, why would it be 144,000? I mean, think of all of the people who have lived from creation to today. I mean, we have billions of people on the earth today, but only 144,000 people across all time will be saved? Doesn't make sense. That can't make sense. That doesn't fit with who we know God to be from the rest of the Bible. That's not right interpretation. So we have to break this down. I have our numbers. I showed it to you last week or the week before. Really should have been in lesson 1. Some meanings that are applied to numbers that we see throughout the book. So in order to break this down, we're really going to pick out 2 of these numbers, which would be number 10 and number 12. Those are 2 very important numbers we have to know for this interpretation, because at this time, the number 10 brings about the idea of completion. 10 was the basis for most number systems in the world. It was the basis for a lot of things that brought about completion. 10 was a complete group. 12 was also the idea of completion. This idea of human completion. We see this in the Bible a lot. 12 spies, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 apostles. These numbers show up even in our Bibles. And so now we can use those 2 numbers to break down our 144,000. I'll do it for you. 10, completion, times 10, completion, times 10, completion. It gets us 1,000. Couldn't fit it all on one row. 1,000 times 12 gives us our 12,000. So we have completion times completion times completion times human completion. That 12,000 times 12 tribes of Israel, or another human completion. Do you get the picture? Completion times completion. You have complete times complete times complete times complete times complete. Does that bring any ideas to mind? Completion, complete. The 144,000 represents a complete whole number. It's being drilled in for emphasis. I know I just said the word complete probably more times than you've heard your entire life, all in about 10 seconds. But that's the point. It's complete, but it's complete what? It's 144,000 what? What does it literally say it is? The tribes of Israel, right? We have 144,000 Israelites. Now that presents a problem. For someone who teaches that only 144,000 people can be saved, if 144,000 is literal, why is it not just Israelites who are saved? They wouldn't teach that. We wouldn't teach that. It's just talking about the people of God. Wrapping up real quick. The 144,000 of God's people, the complete group of God's people, are the ones who shall stand. The answer to the question, who will survive the judgment that is coming, it's all of God's people. There's more in the chapter that really helps make that point further, but we're out of time. So if you want to talk to me more about it, you can. Just come and ask me. I'll talk to you more. But that brings us to the end. We're out of time. Next week, we're going to transition to our next group of 7. So be prepared for that. Thanks.